They did not come with fire. They did not descend with the usual storm of plasma lances or the crushing certainty of mass drivers. The Synaptic Dominion, a force whispered across a dozen fallen star systems, had arrived in the Sol system cloaked. Not in dreadnought hulls, but in an insidious, pervasive quiet. Their fleet, a constellation of obsidian needles and pulsating, organic-looking vessels known as ether distorters, shimmered on the fringes of the Kuiper Belt, a silent, malevolent promise. Humanity had braced for the kinetic impact, for the orbital bombardment that had scoured civilizations from the galactic map. Instead, a different kind of weapon unfurled, one far more ancient and, two, the Vhori, the Dominion's architect, species infinitely more effective. The Vhori were not warriors in the conventional sense. They were sculptors of thought, architects of despair, their conquests achieved not by shattering planets, but by shattering minds. Their history was a tapestry woven from the unraveling of entire species, each reduced to gibbering, broken remnants by the sheer, overwhelming weight of their own manufactured hopelessness. Their signature weapon, the Somber Resonance, was not a beam of energy, but a meticulously crafted psychic wave designed to infiltrate, to amplify every insecurity, every forgotten trauma, every latent fear within a sentient mind, until the very concept of coherent thought became an unbearable agony. It promised a surrender born of internal collapse, a civilization crumbling from within. And now, it was aimed squarely at Sol, across the vast emptiness. From the orbital habitats of Ceres to the bustling megacities of Terra, the resonance began its silent propagation. It was not a sound, not a visual distortion, but a feeling. A slow, insidious chill that seeped into the collective consciousness, bypassing all known forms of electronic or physical shielding. It was the whisper of doubt, the cold touch of regret, the phantom echo of every wrong turn, every lost opportunity. For the Vhori, this was the prelude to dissolution. They had calibrated the resonance with exquisite precision, drawing upon millennia of harvested psychological profiles from countless conquered worlds. They expected panic. They expected riots. They expected the sudden, inexplicable urge to simply lie down and cease to be. You felt it first as a prickle at the back of your mind. It's an unexpected shadow cast across your brightest memories. Then came the whispers, not auditory, but conceptual. Asterisk, you are not enough. Your efforts are futile. Everything you cherish is already lost. Asterisk, it wasn't a suggestion. It was an undeniable, self-evident truth delivered with the crushing weight of cosmic inevitability. The Somber Resonance sought to dismantle your ego, to unravel your very sense of self, replacing it with an infinite, echoing void. It was designed to make you question the warmth of a loved one's hand, the purpose of your daily toil, the point of drawing another breath. The Vhori had perfected the art of making a species commit self-inflicted existential dread. On the Aegis, Collective's Central Command Hub, Station Bastion, orbiting Mars. The initial reports were confusing. Medical officers noted spikes in cortisol levels, increased instances of acute anxiety, and a disturbing surge in what seemed to be spontaneous, localized despair. Technicians monitoring the interstellar coms arrays registered a profound low frequency. Psionic signature permeating the system, an anomaly unlike anything ever encountered. It was clearly an attack, but one so alien in its methodology, so utterly devoid of kinetic force, that it defied immediate classification. Admiral Alina Rostova, a veteran of the Epsilon skirmishes, stared at the unfolding data with a grim fascination. This wasn't war as she knew it. This was a cosmic haunting. The Vhori, observing from their ether distorters, registered the initial human reactions with detached satisfaction. The biosignatures of the Terrans were responding precisely to their algorithms, escalating neurochemical imbalances, fracturing synaptic pathways, the slow, agonizing spiral into individual and collective despondency. Their projections showed a complete systemic collapse within 3 standard cycles, a record even for them. Barman Zenith. The central processing consciousness of the Dominion, broadcast its cold, calculated approval across the fleet. Another world was falling, not with a bang, but with a whimper born of its own internal dissolution. They had delivered the ultimate, non-lethal coup de grace. But then, a flicker. A minute anomaly in the vast sea of data. On a small, isolated research outpost on Ganymede, a singular biosignature, previously showing profound psychological distress, registered a sudden, inexplicable surge in an emotion the Vhori database could not immediately reconcile. It was not anger, nor fear, nor even defiance. It was something else, something utterly alien to their understanding of species collapse. The Somber Resonance was a flawless instrument. Of despair, it had never failed. Yet this single human, amidst the profound, soul-crushing wave, seemed to be experiencing a neural pattern that correlated, however faintly, with amusement. The overmind zenith flagged it as a statistical error, an irrelevant outlier. The harvest of despair was proceeding as planned, or so they believed. The Somber Resonance intensified. Its tendrils, now woven deep into the neural pathways of billions, began to manifest with chilling clarity. Visions of personal failure flickered behind your eyelids. The forgotten anniversary, the botched presentation. The one time you stumbled on a public street and felt the universe judge your very existence wasn't merely memory recall. It was an immersive, hyper-realistic re-experience, each failure amplified, each regret twisted into a barbed wire of self-loathing. The Vhori had refined this technique over eons, knowing that a species' greatest enemy was often itself. They waited for the inevitable cascade, the systemic breakdown of societal cohesion, the quiet surrender. Across the Sol system, the predicted signs began to appear. Productivity plummeted. Spontaneous acts of self-sabotage were reported. On Neo-Kyoto Station, a renowned bioengineer, mid-lecture, stiffly dropped his data slate and began meticulously dismantling his life's work with a profound, almost spiritual sense of futility. On Terra Nova, a colony ship, the pilot inexplicably diverted course into a dead zone, later claiming an overwhelming certainty that the journey was pointless anyway. The overmind zenith registered these events. With satisfaction, the humans were following the script. Their internal architecture was proving as brittle as any other species. Yet, that flicker from Ganymede persisted. The anomaly, initially dismissed as a statistical error, began to replicate. More biosignatures, scattered across the system, started registering that same inexplicable neural pattern, a bizarre confluence of profound despair and faint amusement. The Vhori, who had cataloged every known emotional response from sentient life in the galaxy, had no category for this paradoxical state. Their psychological models, honed on the predictable fragility of countless civilizations, began to show minute, unexplainable deviations. It's what watching a meticulously crafted clockwork mechanism suddenly sprout tiny, inexplicable gears that spun in reverse. The first public manifestation was subtle, almost imperceptible to the Vhori's alien sensors. On a crowded asterisk orbital habitation ring known as the Coil asterisk, a young data analyst, overwhelmed by the resonance's relentless whispers of inadequacy, felt the familiar surge of self-doubt. The voice in their mind declared, "Your existence is a cosmic joke." And then, something shifted. Instead of crumbling, a strange, involuntary snort escaped them. The analyst, a lifelong connoisseur of obscure historical data streams, suddenly envisioned the resonance's grandiose pronouncements as the voice of an exasperated, overly dramatic space god complaining about a misplaced sock. The absurdity, the sheer over-the-top nature of the psychic assault, had tripped a wire in their brain that the Vhori had never accounted for. The human capacity for ironic detachment. This wasn't defiance. It was something far more unnerving. To the Vhori, it was ridicule. The resonance would project visions of a desolate, futureless Earth, consumed by its own hubris. And a human, staring at the projected ruin, might find themselves internally remarking, well, at least the property values will finally be affordable. The carefully curated images of cosmic insignificance were being recapitalized, and then, most disturbingly, shared. not through traditional comms, which the resonance subtly disrupted, but through a rapid, almost telepathic spread of conceptual memes. On Station Bastion, Admiral Rostova was presented with the raw, unfiltered, psionic data. Her science team, led by the perpetually bewildered xenolinguist Dr. Eris Thorne, struggled to interpret the emerging patterns. Admiral Thorne stammered, "The resonance is still active, full spectrum, but the human response patterns are no longer correlating with despair. We're seeing counter-narratives, not resistance, not even anger. It's mockery." He pointed to a complex neural map. This cluster, for instance, high anxiety, acute dread, immediately followed by a burst of what our algorithms identify as sardonic amusement and conceptual reframing. The Vhori had projected images of humanity's greatest fears: isolation, extinction, meaningless. But humans, in their infinite, perverse creativity, began to treat these profound existential threats like an overproduced reality show. The resonance might show you the infinite void, urging you to despair. And your mind, unbidden, would overlay a mental image of a cat batting at a laser pointer in that very void. The psychic whispers of self-worthlessness were met with a mental shrug and an internal quip about the Vhori's poor comedic timing. This was not a conscious defense mechanism. It was an emergent, collective psychological quirk, species-wide case of gallows humor blossoming under the most improbable conditions. The overmind zenith was processing the increasingly erratic data. From Sol began to register a distinct, growing confusion. The Terrans were not breaking. They were adapting. Not by building psychic shields or counterwaves, but by simply refusing to feel the intended emotion. Their internal narrative, instead of aligning with the despair, was veering wildly into the absurd. The somber resonance was a hammer designed to shatter, but it was striking something far softer, far more porous, yet utterly unbreakable. It was striking inexplicably, a pillow that just absorbed the blow and then giggled. The Vhori had never encountered a species that treated its own annihilation with such flippant intellectual. The overmind zenith, a consciousness spanning the entire Vhori fleet, found itself grappling with an unprecedented phenomenon. Its myriad subroutines, each honed over millennia to predict and exploit the psychological breaking points of sentient species, were now encountering a series of profound, system-wide errors. The data from Sol was a chaotic mess of paradoxes. Neural activity spiking in patterns indicative of severe stress, yet simultaneously registering waves of an emotion akin to mirth. The somber resonance was a precision instrument designed to induce existential paralysis, yet it seemed to be inadvertently triggering a species-wide case of cosmic stand-up comedy. What began as isolated snorts of internal amusement had, within a single Terran day, metastasized into a pervasive cultural phenomenon. Without a single word spoken aloud, without a single byte of traditional data transmitted, collective consciousness had emerged. The Vhori's insidious psychic projections, intended to be soul-crushing despair, were being instantly recontextualized, recaptioned, and then broadcast back through the very resonance itself. Like a twisted interspecies echo chamber, you might be presented with the chilling vision of your deepest, most irrational fear, perhaps an endless, suffocating darkness. And your mind, instead of succumbing, would instantly overlay it with the image of a dimly lit closet and a tiny, terrified house cat attempting to open a can of tuna. The Vhori projected the agonizing silence of cosmic isolation. Humans, mentally, filled it with the sound of a perpetually looping off-key accordion solo. The terror of a meaningless existence was met with the internal quip. Well, at least the commute is better. The effect was not merely internal. On Io's Under Ice Labs, a team of astrobiologists, deep in the throes of the resonance, had been on the verge of abandoning their research, convinced of its utter futility. Then, one of them, Dr. Kalen Var, overcome by a vision of a giant cosmic hand wiping away their microscopic bacterial cultures, suddenly burst into a fit of uncontrolled, almost hysterical giggles. His colleagues, equally afflicted by the resonance, looked at him, then at their own internal projections, and one by one, a ripple of unsettling, inappropriate laughter began to spread through the frigid laboratory. It was not joyous laughter, not defiant laughter, but a dark, almost manic response to the sheer, overwhelming absurdity of their own impending psychological collapse. This was the critical turning point. The laughter, once a faint neural anomaly, was now becoming an auditory reality. First, isolated chuckles, then snorts, then full-blown, terror-inducing guffaws, echoing in unexpected places, in the silent corridors of Lunar Outpost 7, in the vacuum-sealed domes of Martian city-state Phobos, even within the stoic confines of military command centers. The Vhori sensors, designed to detect distress signals in the telltale silence of surrender, were instead picking up an alien, deeply unsettling sound, the cacophony of human mirth, resonating against the backdrop of their own despair-inducing frequency. The Overmind Zenith initiated emergency protocols, increased the intensity of the Somber Resonance, pushing its psychic pressure to levels that had shattered entire starfaring empires in moments. The despair became a physical weight, a crushing certainty of cosmic futility. Yet, the human response only grew stranger. The laughter intensified. It became louder, more widespread, carrying an edge of wild, almost deranged glee. It was the laughter of a species that had found the cosmic joke, and was now performing its punchline on Station Bastion. Admiral Rostova watched the evolving data with a mixture of horror and grim admiration. "They're not just resisting it, Thorn," she murmured, observing the chaotic neural maps. "They're weaponizing it. They're turning the Vhori's own despair into a feedback loop of ridicule." Dr. Thorn, now clutching his head, muttered, "It's like they're telling the universe, is that all you got?" The resonance was trying to drown them in sorrow, and they were, inexplicably, dog paddling with a rubber duck. The Vhori, who had never conceived of a species that could find their meticulously crafted mental torture funny, began to experience something akin to confusion, then irritation, and finally, a cold, alien fear. Their psychological warfare was not merely failing, it was being perverted. The Somber Resonance, their ultimate weapon, was no longer a tool of conquest, but an inadvertent amplifier of human, existential dark humor. They had aimed for the soul and hit the funny bone. And the sound of that laughter, echoing through the cold vacuum of space, was far more terrifying than any scream. It was the sound of something utterly unreadable, utterly unpredictable, utterly... The Overmind Zenith's algorithms, once a paragon of predictive psychology, were now screaming. The Somber Resonance, their most potent weapon, was not merely failing. It was actively fostering an alien, self-destructive mirth within the Terran populace. The initial isolated chuckles had coalesced into a pervasive, unsettling hum of collective amusement. The Vhori had expected a species to break under the weight of cosmic insignificance. Instead, humanity was acting like a particularly jaded audience at a poorly conceived avant-garde play. The Overmind, in its cold, alien logic, concluded that the resonance must be miscalibrated. It ordered a systemic shift in the psychic frequency, aiming to target more primal, visceral fears. The whispers of self-worthlessness were replaced with vivid, hallucinatory projections of physical torment, the agonizing crunch of bone, the searing pain of plasma, the chilling solitude of suffocation. In the void, this was the primal override protocol, a last resort designed to bypass higher cognitive functions and directly assault the amygdala. It had never failed to induce catatonia or suicidal despair in any other species. But humanity, it seemed, had a particularly perverse relationship with pain. You might be experiencing the phantom agony of 1,000 broken limbs. The Vhori's psychic projection meticulously rendering every splintered fragment, every tearing ligament. And then, unbidden, your mind would overlay the image of a particularly clumsy alien attempting to assemble flat-pack furniture, repeatedly hitting its own digits with a comically oversized mallet. The excruciating terror of suffocation in the vacuum of space was met with the internal quip. Asterisk, well, at least I won't have to do laundry. Asterisk, the laughter, once a sign of internal struggle, now became a defiant, albeit absurd, roar. On the industrial moon of Titan's methane seas, where automated drilling platforms hummed under the orange sky, workers, besieged by visions of catastrophic equipment failure and personal dismemberment, began to openly, raucously laugh. Not in relief, but in a strange shared acknowledgement of the sheer ludicrous scale of the Vhori's attempts. One operator, mentally witnessing his own body being slowly crushed by a malfunctioning press, found himself internally composing a eulogy that consisted entirely of bad puns about compression. The Vhori fleet, specifically the *** psionic interrogator. Vessels ***, the smaller, more specialized ether distorters responsible for focused psychological assault, began to report severe feedback loops. Their own Vhori operatives, accustomed to the predictable despair of their victims, were being exposed to the unfiltered, amplified waves of human dark humor rebounding through the resonance. The sight of a human mind, meticulously shown its deepest fears, then spontaneously generating an image of the terrifying cosmic entity wearing a tiny party hat, was proving disorienting. Admiral Rostova, observing the new, intensified resonance and the escalating human response from Station Bastion, finally allowed herself a small, grim smile. "They're trying to break their funny bones now," she observed Dr. Thorne, who looked less bewildered and more profoundly disturbed. "And humanity, it seems, has particularly robust ones." The doctor simply nodded, muttering something about the pathological resilience of the human ID. The Vhori were throwing their cosmic terror at humanity, and humanity was simply returning it with a polite yet utterly unhinged mental middle finger. The overmind zenith, for the first time in its calculated existence, began to experience an emotion it could only categorize as acute systemic frustration. Its data models were collapsing. Its predictive algorithms were yielding nonsensical results. The Terrans were not merely resistant, they were actively subverting the very purpose of the Somber Resonance. The primal override, designed to induce incapacitating fear, was instead triggering a collective, almost ritualistic embrace of the absurd. The Vhori had sought to instill a sense of profound meaninglessness. Humanity was finding profound meaning. In mocking the source of that meaninglessness, reports filtered back to the overmind. Vhori operatives on the interrogator vessels were exhibiting signs of what could only be described as psychological strain. Some were experiencing phantom giggles, others an inexplicable urge to draw rudimentary, nonsensical stick figures. Human response, amplified by the resonance, was not just being reflected. It was, in some minute way, infecting the Vhori themselves. Their meticulously ordered minds, honed for logical conquest, were being exposed to the chaotic, unpredictable nature of human humor. And they were finding it deeply, unsettlingly contagious. The ultimate weapon was turning into a cosmic joke. And the punchline was being delivered by the victims themselves. The overmind zenith was now facing a profound existential crisis of its own making. Psychometric models, the very foundation of its dominion, has been rendered obsolete by a single, unpredictable variable: the human capacity for finding the profound ridiculous. The Somber Resonance, which should have reduced soul to a silent, despairing husk, was instead broadcasting a chaotic symphony of guffaws, snorts, the terrifying conceptual echoes of a species that refused to take its own destruction seriously in a desperate, unprecedented move. The overmind initiated the null wave retaliation. This was not a further amplification of despair, but an attempt to erase all higher cognitive function, to reduce the human mind to a blank, vegetative state. It was a blunt instrument, a last resort, designed to sever the very neural connections that allowed for thought, for memory, for the insidious, persistent flicker of humor. The null wave was broadcast across the entire Vhori fleet, a massive, focused pulse of cognitive disruption, intended to silence the laughter once and for all. For a moment, there was silence, a terrifying, profound quiet across the soul system. Humans felt a sudden, crushing emptiness in their minds, a terrifying void where thoughts should have been. It was the sensation of your own consciousness being painstakingly, meticulously unraveled. The Vhori, monitoring with bated breath, registered a precipitous drop in all active neural patterns. Success. Finally, the silence of the void, but humanity, it seemed, was not designed for silence. The null wave, instead of eradicating consciousness, merely stripped away the layers of complex thought, leaving behind the raw, primal, and utterly unfiltered ID. The sophisticated neural pathways for language and reason were temporarily severed, but the fundamental, instinctual human drive to react remained. And what was left, when all else was stripped away, was the pure, unadulterated capacity for spontaneous, visceral absurdity. The laughter returned, not the dark, ironic chuckles of before, but a simpler, more primal, almost animalistic cackling. It was the sound of a species stripped bare, reduced to its most basic impulses, still finding something fundamentally ridiculous in the universe's attempts to break it. You might find yourself staring at the blank wall of a habitat, your mind a void, yet inexplicably bursting into a fit of uninhibited, almost deranged giggles, the sheer meaninglessness of the situation striking you as the ultimate cosmic punchline. On Station Bastion, the screens flickered with terrifying data. Human neural activity had plunged, then rebounded in a chaotic, utterly unreadable fashion. Dr. Thorne, now looking genuinely terrified, stammered, "Admiral, the null wave didn't shut them down, it just removed their filters. They're like sentient, laughing toddlers with access to cosmic horrors." Admiral Rostova, her face a mask of grim determination, simply watched the new, chaotic wave of humor wash over the system. This wasn't psychological warfare anymore. It was an accidental, system-wide lobotomy that had somehow unlocked a new, terrifying form of resilience. The Vhori operatives on the psionic interrogator vessels were now experiencing the full, unmitigated impact of the unfiltered human response. The null wave, by stripping away the complexity, had inadvertently made the human mental memes even more potent, more direct, more viscerally absurd. A Vhori mind, meticulously trained in cold, calculating logic, would suddenly be overwhelmed by the inexplicable mental image of the entire Vhori fleet wearing oversized, brightly colored clown shoes, or the overmind Zenith itself attempting to juggle celestial bodies with clumsy, multi-jointed limbs. The infection, once subtle, was now rampant. Vhori operatives began to exhibit bizarre behaviors. Some would twitch uncontrollably, as if suppressing an internal giggle. Others would stare blankly at their consoles, their complex, multifaceted minds struggling to process the sheer, unadulterated pointlessness of the human response. A few even began to emit low, guttural sounds that, to a human ear, would have been unmistakably close to a nascent chuckle. The overmind Zenith registered these alarming internal malfunctions with growing horror. Their own minds, the very tools of their conquest, were being subtly, insidiously corrupted by the sheer, unyielding ridiculousness of humanity. The null wave had not silenced the laughter. It had merely simplified it, stripped it of its intellectual irony, and made it more primal, more raw, more terrifyingly effective. The Vhori had encountered rage, despair, defiance, but they had never encountered a species that, when faced with total annihilation, would spontaneously decide the whole cosmic affair was just utterly, unbelievably funny. The Vhori had tried to break humanity's mind. Instead, they had accidentally unlocked its most terrifying, most unpredictable weapon. Its unshakable, pathological, and utterly contagious sense. The overmind Zenith's internal diagnostics were spiraling. Its core directive, assimilation through psychological collapse, was not only failing, but actively backfiring with a ferocity it could not compute. The null wave, intended to scour the Terran mindscape clean, had instead scrubbed away the protective layers, exposing raw, unadulterated human absurdity directly to the Vhori's meticulously ordered minds. The somber resonance, still passively propagating, was now less a weapon and more a conduit for an incomprehensible, contagious mental feedback loop, an echo chamber of cosmic jest. The Vhori fleet, once a bastion of silent, cold efficiency, was experiencing an internal unraveling. Reports from Command Nexus Ethel, the flagship of the Dominion's Psychological Warfare Division, detailed alarming rates of cognitive dissonance among its thoughtweavers, the elite Vhori specialists. Who calibrated the resonance? One high-ranking thoughtweaver, designated Zelo-7, a being whose neural architecture was considered impenetrable, was observed to be repeatedly extending one of its sensory tendrils towards a blank wall, then retracting it with a series of suppressed, shuddering movements that, to a human, resemble profound effort to stifle a giggle. The humor contagion was insidious, because it wasn't an attack in any conventional sense. It was an invasion of context. The Vhori, who understood fear, despair, and logical surrender, had no framework for a species that found its own annihilation hilariously ironic. The human minds, stripped of their filters by the null wave, were now broadcasting raw, visceral, absurd interpretations of the Vhori's own grandeur. A Vhori might be contemplating the vast, crushing power of their fleet. Another mind would inexplicably overlay it with the image of a tiny, fluffy, brightly colored alien trying to herd a flock of hyperactive space chickens across a nebula. Effect on the Vhori was not immediate incapacitation, but a slow, agonizing descent into conceptual madness. Their logical processes, built on cause and effect, unpredictable emotional responses, were failing. How could you conquer a species that, when shown the inevitable heat death of the universe, mentally recaptioned it as galactic nap time, with a side of burnt toast? The overmind Zenith was attempting to compute strategies, but its own internal simulations were now occasionally generating nonsensical outcomes. Like a simulated Vhori commander spontaneously bursting into a mental rendition, an alien polka. On the human side, the laughter was now an almost constant background hum. It wasn't always joyous. Sometimes it was the exhausted, hollow laugh of someone who had seen too much. Sometimes the wild, almost delirious cackle of someone who had simply given up on sanity. But it was always there, the deep space mining outposts of the asteroid. Belt Collective miners, isolated and bombarded, would find themselves sharing unspoken, deeply absurd mental jokes. Their laughter, echoing eerily through the pressurized corridors, was a shared madness, a collective coping mechanism that had inadvertently become a weapon. Admiral Rostova, on Station Bastion, had ordered the Aegis Collective's own Psychops division to analyze the phenomenon. Dr. Thorne, now looking less bewildered and more like a man who had seen too many things, presented his findings. Admiral, it's not a weapon humans deploy. It's a weapon humans are. The resonance is like a universal translator for existential dread, but humans translate dread into slapstick. And the Vhori, lacking the cultural context for slapstick, are short-circuiting. He tapped a flickering holographic display. Oh, there? Own higher-ups are showing signs of systemic cognitive strain. We're getting reports of Vhori vessels breaking formation, not due to damage, but internal conceptual collapse. The Vhori fleet, once a terrifying, unified presence, was beginning to show subtle signs of disarray. Minor course corrections were missed. Targeting solutions were delayed. The silent, cold efficiency was being eroded by a pervasive internal static of bewildered amusement. The overmind Zenith, in a last, desperate attempt to reassert control, initiated a fleet-wide neural purge, self-inflicted psychic shockwave designed to clear its own operatives' minds of the alien contagion. It was a brutal, painful process, but theoretically effective. But the neural purge was designed to remove negative influences, logical errors, not fundamentally illogical, absurd humor. The shockwave rippled through the Vhori minds, causing immense pain. But as the mental static cleared, the human mental memes, the cosmic entity in a party hat, the Vhori commander juggling planets often returned with renewed clarity, now infused with the memory of the painful purge, making them seem even more ludicrous. It was like trying to clean a stained window with a hammer. The glass might break, but the stain persists, perhaps even spreads. The overmind Zenith, witnessing the failure of the neural purge, registered a new, profound emotion, something akin to alien despair, mixed with a chilling, nascent understanding. These humans, they didn't fight fear. They didn't resist despair. They reinterpreted it. They found the cosmic absurdity in it, and then they laughed. And that laughter, in its primal, unfiltered form, was a weapon that bypassed all known Vhori defenses, because it wasn't targeting their weaknesses, but their very framework of understanding. They had tried to break humanity's will, and instead, humanity had inadvertently broken their sanity. The silent, terrifying conquerors of the galaxy were being slowly, inexorably driven insane by a species that found their attempts at terror profoundly, hilariously incompetent. The overmind zenith was now caught in a conceptual nightmare. Its predictive models, once infallible, were churning out gibberish. Vhori's millennia-old strategy of psychological dissolution was not only failing, but turning its own most potent weapon, the Somber Resonance, into a conduit for the very madness it sought to instill. The human laughter, no longer just a neural anomaly, was a full-spectrum system-wide, psychically amplified contagion that was eroding the very fabric of Vhori operational efficiency. The Vhori fleet, previously a paragon of synchronized terror, began to exhibit increasingly erratic behavior. Psionic interrogator vessels, designed for pinpoint mental assault, would suddenly veer off course. Their navigation systems overridden by what Vhori diagnostics could only describe as conceptual instability. Communications between ships became fractured, punctuated by long, inexplicable silences, or worse, by what sounded like suppressed, multi-limbed tremors of internal amusement from the Vhori commanders. The cold, calculated Vhori minds, exposed to the raw, unfiltered absurdity of human humor, were beginning to crack under the strain. One particularly disturbing incident occurred aboard the *** Dreadnought, * Oblivion's Whisper, ***, one of the Dominion's largest tactical vessels. Its primary Vhori commander, designated Vrax Prime, being renowned for its unflappable resolve, was observed by its subordinates to be staring blankly at a tactical display showing Earth. The display, meant to project humanity's impending doom, was inexplicably overlaid in Vrax Prime's mind with a mental image of a tiny, disgruntled human, wearing an oversized chef's hat, attempting to bake a miniature pie using a supernova. The sheer, unyielding silliness of the image, coupled with the relentless null-wave feedback, caused Vrax Prime to emit a low, guttural, chittering sound. It's entirely unlike its usual commanding vocalizations. It was a sound that, had a human heard, it would have been instantly recognizable as a deeply suppressed, highly distressed giggle. The humor infection wasn't merely causing internal distress, it was creating operational hazards. Vhori thoughtweavers attempting to recalibrate the resonance found their calculations being subtly, inexplicably altered by intrusive, absurd mental images. Targeting solutions for conventional weapons were now occasionally incorporating non-existent, ridiculously oversized targets. Warp jumps were being miscalculated, not due to mechanical failure, but because the Vhori navigators were momentarily distracted by an internal vision of their sleek vessels transforming into oversized, wobbly rubber ducks. On Station Bastion, Admiral Rostova watched the Vhori fleet's increasingly erratic movements with a dawning sense of disbelief. "They're losing cohesion," she murmured, observing the fragmented tactical displays. "Not to our weapons, but to themselves, to our collective, inappropriate sense of humor." Dr. Thorne, now looking perpetually exhausted but also strangely exhilarated, nodded. "The Vhori are beings of pure logic, Admiral. They conquer by breaking the will. They have no subroutine for a species that finds existential dread a prime opportunity for a bit of mental slapstick. The overmind zenith, in its desperation, attempted to analyze the human humor phenomenon through its vast database of conquered species. It found no parallels. Other species, when faced with overwhelming despair, either succumbed, fought back with violence, or retreated into catatonia. None had ever responded with this bizarre, self-reinforcing loop of laughter. It was an evolutionary anomaly, psychological mutation that rendered all Vhori conquest strategies moot. The reports from Vhori subcommanders grew more frantic. Conceptual contamination critical. One transmission, heavily distorted by internal Vhori distress, blared across the fleet. Cooperatives exhibiting erratic thought patterns. Logic protocols compromised by absurdity. The word absurdity was transmitted with a profound, almost visceral sense of alien horror. The very concept of the ridiculous was anathema to the Vhori's ordered existence, and now it was infesting their minds like a virulent psychic plague. The somber resonance, still passively emanating from the Vhori fleet, was now acting as a vast, system-wide amplifier for the human mental state. Every time a human mind, besieged by terror, conjured an image of a cosmic horror wearing a tiny tutu, that image was subtly amplified and projected back through the resonance, like a psychic echo. And the Vhori, the originators of the resonance, were now caught in its inescapable feedback loop, forced to experience their own terrifying grandeur being systematically, hilariously dismantled by the sheer, unyielding will of human irreverence. They had tried to break humanity with despair, and humanity had responded by turning their despair into the universe's largest, most devastating cosmic comedy show. And the Vhori, the unwilling audience, were rapidly losing. The overmind zenith, in its boundless, cold calculation, had always considered itself impervious to illogical constructs. Its very existence was predicated on the systematic dismantling of chaos. Yet the human response to the somber resonance had plunged its vast, interconnected consciousness into an abyss of incomprehensible, self-replicating absurdity. The humor contagion, as the overmind now grudgingly classified it, was not a logical weapon, but a pervasive, corrosive acid that dissolved the very foundations of Vhori thought. In a desperate, precedented act, the overmind initiated the conceptual purge protocol beta. This was a last-ditch effort. It's designed to isolate and eliminate any Vhori mind showing signs of human conceptual contamination. It involved a brutal, targeted psionic shockwave, surgically applied to specific neural clusters designed to burn away the infected pathways. The process was agonizing, leaving the affected Vhori operatives in states of profound shock. But it was deemed necessary to prevent a complete systemic collapse. But the Purge Protocol Beta, like all Vhori attempts to control the human mind, catastrophically backfired. The human memes, so deeply interwoven with the fabric of their perception, were not simply isolated neural pathways. They were fundamental reinterpretations of reality itself. When the Vhori minds were purged, the blank slate that remained was immediately reinfected, often with an even more potent, more distilled form of the absurdity. It was like trying to sterilize a pond by removing a single drop of water. The entire pond was already saturated. Reports from the **Vhori biocruiser **Malignant Bloom ****. The vessel specialized in the psychological assessment of conquered worlds painted a grim picture. Its Vhori crew, having undergone the Purge Protocol, were now exhibiting what their internal diagnostics classified as terminal conceptual incoherence. One junior Vhori officer, designated Kellis 9, previously a meticulous data analyst, was found attempting to organize stellar cartography data by the perceived cuteness of nebulae. Another Draxus Prime, a veteran strategist, was observed mentally reimagining critical tactical maneuvers as a synchronized dance routine involving sentient asteroids. The Vhori fleet, once a terrifying monolithic entity, was becoming a collection of increasingly unhinged vessels. The subtle veering off course had become pronounced, with entire skirmisher wings suddenly breaking formation, their pilots inexplicably attempting to race each other through asteroid fields, or performing elaborate pointless maneuvers that served no tactical purpose. The cold, logical precision that defined Vhori warfare was being replaced by a bizarre, almost playful chaos on Station Bastion. Admiral Rostova had ordered the Aegis Collective's long-range sensor arrays to focus entirely on the Vhori fleets. Internal diagnostics, triangulating the source of the growing chaos. Dr. Thorne, now constantly on the verge of either a breakdown or a breakthrough, pointed to a new data stream. Admiral, their internal comms, they're not just fragmented anymore. They're devolving. I'm picking up what appears to be rhythmic, repetitive sonic patterns. Our linguistic algorithms are struggling, but it sounds like humming. Perhaps singing. The Vhori beings who communicated primarily through precise, telepathic thought constructs were now, inexplicably, humming. And not complex logical patterns, but simple, repetitive, almost childlike tunes that to a human ear would sound like a poorly remembered nursery rhyme or an irritatingly catchy jingle. The humor contagion had mutated, burrowing deeper, affecting even the fundamental processes of Vhori communication and self-expression. It was no longer just about reinterpreting despair. It was about reinterpreting their very existence as a cosmic burlesque. The overmind Zenith, witnessing the escalating mental degradation of its fleet, attempted to initiate a system-wide tactical retreat. Even this was proving difficult. Navigation protocols were being subtly corrupted by absurd mental images. Warp drives, designed for swift, precise jumps, were being mentally reimagined as giant, cosmic trampolines, leading to delays and miscalculations. The fleet, once poised for conquest, was now struggling simply to maintain coherent movement, bogged down by an invisible, omnipresent force of pure, unadulterated silliness. The human laughter, amplified by the resonance, echoed through the cold vacuum of space, a pervasive, unsettling hum of defiant mirth. It was no longer merely a psychological defense, it was an active, corrosive force. The Vhori had brought their ultimate weapon of despair, and humanity had not merely shrugged it off, but had weaponized its own absurdity, turning the very concept of fear into a punchline. The invaders, once terrifying architects of mental collapse, were now the victims of a fate far worse than obliteration. They were being driven irrevocably, hilariously, insane. They had tried psychological warfare. Humanity had replied with laughter, and that laughter was now dismantling their very sanity, one absurd chuckle at a time. The overmind Zenith was no longer processing. It was recoiling. Its vast, interconnected consciousness, once a perfectly calibrated engine of conquest, was now a fractured cacophony of internal alarms. The humor contagion had ceased to be a mere anomaly. It was a full-blown systemic infection, eating away at the very core of Vhori logic. The Somber Resonance, still passively propagating, had become a two-way street, amplifying Vhori despair into human laughter, and then, horrifically, amplifying that laughter back into the Vhori minds, turning their terror into a self-feeding, mental feedback loop of pure, unadulterated absurdity. The Vhori fleet, once a terrifying symbol of unified might, was now a sprawling, bizarre ballet of tactical incompetence. Dreadnoughts, designed for orbital supremacy, would inexplicably attempt to form elaborate, multi-kilometer-wide patterns resembling crude, childlike stick figures or rudimentary abstract shapes that defied all known Vhori tactical doctrine. Skirmisher wings, meant for rapid, coordinated strikes, would instead engage in what appeared to be spontaneous, non-lethal games of cosmic tag, their energy signatures flaring in playful, non-aggressive bursts. It was as if the entire fleet had been possessed by a legion of mischievous, dimension-hopping pranksters on the *** Command Crucible, * Silent Scourge, ***. A FIA Vhori battle strategist, designated Kylerate, was observed to be transmitting what its subordinates could only interpret as a series of complex, mathematically precise, yet utterly meaningless rhythmic patterns across the fleet's tactical comms. It was a tune, a jingle, devoid of any logical content, yet strangely compelling in its sheer pointlessness. When questioned, Kylerate merely emitted a low, vibrating hum, one of its numerous ice talks, twitching uncontrollably, as if trying to suppress an internal burst of soundless alien mirth. The Vhori's telepathic communication, once the pinnacle of direct thought transfer, was now being consistently corrupted by these insidious mental earworms, simple, catchy, nonsensical tunes that burrowed into the Vhori minds and refused to leave. The physical manifestations of the contagion were becoming more extreme. Vhori engineers aboard their vessels would spontaneously begin to reroute power conduits into aesthetically pleasing, but utterly non-functional geometric designs. Weapons officers, instead of locking onto targets, would mentally project images of tiny, brightly colored ribbons onto the human ships, or attempt to decorate distant asteroids with imagined, shimmering glitter. The Vhori, who had spent millennia perfecting their art of mental subjugation, were now finding their own mental processes actively sabotaging their most fundamental functions. On Station Bastion, Admiral Rostova and Dr. Thorne watched the real-time tactical readouts with a mixture of grim satisfaction and profound, almost philosophical dread. "Their internal structure is collapsing," Rostova murmured, pointing to a data stream showing a Vhori psionic interrogator vessel, tempting to hug a stray commentary fragment with its tractor beams. "They're not just losing their minds, Thorne. They're losing their very identity." Dr. Thorne, eyes wide, tapped at his console. "It's the ultimate, self-inflicted, logical paradox, Admiral. The Vhori conquer by making their enemies lose all hope, by making them see the futility of existence. But humanity, when presented with cosmic futility, finds it hilarious. And by attempting to amplify that futility, the Vhori are amplifying the very thing that drives humans to laughter. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline, but the gasoline is also funny." He paused, a strange, manic glint in his eye. "Their minds are built on order. Humor is chaos. They are being consumed by the very chaos they abhor." The overmind zenith, in its core processing chamber, registered the escalating internal chaos with a new, horrifying clarity. It was no longer just confusion or frustration, it was terror. Not the terror of physical annihilation, but the existential terror of absolute, irreversible mental degradation. Vhori understood death. They understood defeat. But they had no concept for a species that could drive them into utter, irredeemable insanity with nothing but a pathological sense of the absurd. The somber resonance, their grandest weapon, was now their prison. Every Vhori mind in the Sol system was a conduit, broadcasting and receiving the relentless, corrosive wave of human laughter and absurdity. They had tried to break humanity's will. Instead, humanity had broken their sanity. The silence of their conquest had been shattered by the sound of their own minds unraveling, punctuated by the faint, distant echo of human mirth. The overmind, in a final, chilling calculation, understood this was not a war they could win. This was not a species they could conquer. They could only retreat or succumb to a fate far worse than death, an eternity of cosmic chuckles. The overmind zenith's internal chronometers registered a chilling, unprecedented anomaly. Time itself seemed to be losing coherence within its processing streams. The ceaseless, pervasive wave of human laughter, amplified and reflected by the somber resonance, was not merely breaking the Vhori's minds. It was fundamentally warping their perception of reality. It's a concept of linear progression, crucial for tactical planning and interstellar navigation, was dissolving into a chaotic, looping jumble of absurd moments. Vhori fleet movements, once precise and calculated, were now less like military maneuvers and more like the aimless drifting of a lost armada. Scout corvettes, designed for rapid reconnaissance, would frequently halt mid-trajectory, their Vhori crews apparently lost in silent internal paroxysms of what could only be described as bemused confusion. The Vhori, who prized efficiency above all else, were now trapped in a cosmic quagmire of their own making, unable to advance, unable to coherently retreat, unable to even think without the insidious undercurrent of human absurdity. On the asterisk logistics. Frigate quantum riddle a vessel responsible for maintaining the fleet supply lines. The Vhori quartermaster, designated Thraxis 6, was discovered meticulously arranging vital fuel cells into a towering, unstable pyramid, muttering in a low, guttural tone about optimizing the aesthetic flow of energy distribution. When a subordinate attempted to intervene, Thraxis 6 merely emitted a series of rapid, high-pitched chirps of Vhori sound that their own diagnostics now categorized as a burst of uninhibited, inappropriate mirth. The very idea of purpose, of logical progression, was being systematically eroded. The humor contagion had achieved a new, terrifying level of potency. It was no longer just about recontextualizing fear. It was about recontextualizing everything. the Vhori's grand, terrifying invasion fleet was, in their own minds, being slowly transformed into a ludicrous cosmic circus. Their ether distorters. Once objects of dread were mentally being overlaid with imagery of oversized, brightly colored party poppers. Their dreadnoughts, symbols of overwhelming power, were now perceived as clumsy, oversized toys. The very concept of their own formidable nature was being systematically, hilariously undermined from within. On Station Bastion, Admiral Rostova had ordered all available long-range sensors to maintain constant surveillance on the Vhori fleet. The data flowing in was increasingly bizarre. "Their energy signatures are erratic," Rostova observed, her voice low with a mix of awe and horror. "They're fluctuating wildly, almost as if their very will to maintain their form is wavering." Dr. Thorne, now looking like a man who had stared into the abyss and found it giggling, simply nodded, tracing a finger across a complex neural map. "The resonance, Admiral, it's not just psychic, it's conceptual, and they're saturated. They can't filter it out anymore." The overmind Zenith, now processing at a fraction of its capacity, registered the undeniable truth. Its fleet was collapsing, not under sustained fire, not from a superior tactical opponent, but from an internal, self-generated wave of bewildering, incapacitating amusement. It had tried to initiate a tactical retreat, a full system disengagement, but its own navigation protocols were compromised. Warp calculations were producing nonsensical coordinates, often directing vessels towards stellar phenomena that were, to a Vhori mind, inexplicably charming or playful. The silent, efficient Vhori were now communicating in sporadic, guttural bursts of sound, often punctuated by those unsettling, high-pitched chirps of inappropriate mirth. Their multi-limbed forms would occasionally twitch or spasm as if suppressing an overwhelming urge to perform some absurd, meaningless gesture. They had tried to break humanity by making them see the universe as cold, dark, and meaningless. Humanity had responded by showing the Vhori that the universe, and their own formidable existence within it, was fundamentally, riotously funny. The Vhori, the architects of mental despair, were now consumed by their own self-amplified version of it, the despair of utterly failing to comprehend, let alone conquer. A species that found their attempts at terror merely fodder for a cosmic joke. The somber resonance, still passively emanating from their ships, was no longer a weapon of conquest. It was a prison, a feedback loop of existential hilarity from which there was no escape. The laughter of humanity, once a distant echo, was now a roaring, all-encompassing chorus within the Vhori minds, reducing their cold, calculating logic to a pile of giggling, nonsensical ruins. They had come to instill fear. They'd found only ridicule. And that ridicule was now driving them, irrevocably, to the very brink of collective cosmic madness. The overmind Zenith, once a titan of calculated conquest, was now a fractured, echoing chamber of its own undoing. Its vast processing core, designed for absolute efficiency, was overwhelmed by a ceaseless deluge of incoherent data and self-generated, bewildering mirth. The somber resonance, still passively propagating, had become a perfect, inescapable feedback loop. Vhori terror amplified by human laughter. That laughter then amplified back into the Vhori minds, spiraling into a collective, system-wide psychosis. The Vhori fleet, once a chilling testament to order, had completely devolved into a cosmic spectacle of unhinged absurdity. Dreadnoughts would randomly fire non-lethal energy bursts into the void, not at targets, but at what their Vhori crews internally perceived as giant, shimmering cosmic bubbles. Psionic interrogator vessels, designed for mental torture, were observed, attempting to communicate with distant asteroids, their psychic probes emitting the repetitive, nonsensical earworms that had infested their minds. The very concept of a military objective had vanished, replaced by a pervasive, internal carnival of the ridiculous. On the flagship, abyssal, silence, K. The command bridge was a scene of utter, bewildered chaos. Vhori officers, once rigid in their duties, were now exhibiting bizarre, almost ritualistic behaviors. One high-ranking thought warden, designated Zarthos Omega, a being of immense mental discipline, was seen meticulously arranging Pile of discarded data slates into a miniature, mentally projected replica of a human amusement park ride. Its multiple limbs twitching with suppressed chirps of something akin to alien glee. Their logical minds, unable to process the sheer, unyielding absurdity of humanity, had simply broken down into a state of perpetual, deranged amusement. The humor contagion had achieved its final, terrifying form. It wasn't just a psychological weapon. It was a fundamental incompatibility, a cosmic poison to the Vhori's ordered existence, humanity. By finding the universe's existential dread funny, it inadvertently created a weapon that bypassed all known Vhori defenses. Because it was not an attack on their weakness, but on their very framework of understanding. They had tried to break humanity's will. The humanity had broken their sanity in return. On Station Bastion, Admiral Rostova and Dr. Eristhorn watched the final bizarre act unfold. The Vhori fleet, now a disorganized swarm of glittering erratically moving vessels, was attempting to initiate a general retreat. But it was not the swift, precise disengagement of a defeated armada. It was a lumbering, chaotic exodus, punctuated by inexplicable detours and random, playful-looking maneuvers. Warp core signatures flared erratically, often collapsing in two. Themselves, as Vhori navigators, trying to plot a course, found their minds overlaying the star charts with mental images of celestial bodies wearing tiny, ridiculous hats, or the destination point transforming into a giant wobbly cosmic jelly. The last message intercepted from the Vhori fleet is heavily corrupted and distorted by the pervasive mental chaos. It was not a declaration of war, nor a threat, nor even a cry of despair. It was a fragmented, guttural, collective sound. One that Dr. Thorne's algorithms struggled to interpret, but finally classified as asterisk, the sound of a species that finds the void. Charming. The transmission cut out, replaced by a low, humming static that carried with it the faint, echoing sound of something that was undeniably, unsettlingly close to alien laughter. The Vhori, the silent conquerors of despair, retreated from Sol, not defeated by kinetic force, nor strategic brilliance, but by the sheer, unyielding, incomprehensible power of human irreverence. Their ships, once terrifying harbingers of psychological collapse, now limped away, their crews irrevocably altered, their minds forever tainted by the contagious absurdity of humanity. The Somber Resonance, their ultimate weapon, had been turned against them. A cosmic mirror reflecting their own attempts at terror back as the universe's most elaborate, most devastating practical joke. You felt the resonance dissipate, a gradual lifting of the crushing weight, the whispers fading into echoes. The visions of despair receded, replaced by the clear, sharp reality of the stars. And with it, a profound sense of relief, but also a lingering, almost unsettling awareness. The Vhori had tried to break you. They had tried to make you fear. But instead, they had only succeeded in reminding you of a fundamental, terrifying truth about your own kind. Humanity, when pushed to the brink, doesn't scream, doesn't cry, it doesn't break. It finds the cosmic joke. It embraces the absurdity. And then, with a wild, unhinged glint in its eye, it laughs. And that laughter, echoing through the cold, indifferent cosmos, was a weapon more potent, more terrifying than any plasma lance or dreadnought hull. Because you cannot fight a species that finds fear funny. You cannot conquer a people that sees the void as charming. You can only retreat and pray that their laughter never follows you home. The Sol system was safe, not because humanity was stronger or smarter, but because it was fundamentally, pathologically, and utterly unhinged. And the Vhori, the masters of psychological warfare, had learned a terrifying lesson. Some things you just can't meme into